So lately I've been doing what I call a seasonal retrospective, a spring retrospective, since it's the summer that just started. And what I did is I looked over my notebooks, but it's hundreds of pages, so I didn't read through all of it yet. And I have my index cards, my Refcards, which are smaller in number, but it's also a daunting task, over 100 Refcards. So what I did is I got the video transcripts of the video presentations, the discourses I call them, that I did on YouTube. I think I did 13 of them, or maybe more if I count the morning constitutionals. But first I want to go over some of the things. I mean, there's a lot to go over, but just the main lines, you know. So I think it was the 15th. So we're going back this, oh man. It was the 11th of May. I created a video called What is the Delta-Workspace Theory, where I went over the new, we already had the Delta-Workspace Theory, but I called it just Workspace Theory, and I took it further, you know. I talked about the archaeology, the geology, the stratification of my stacks, I call them, like stacks of books, stacks of paintings, the sedimentary layers that form in the workspace, because I let it form that way because it helps me to have an exposed surface of what the latest work is that I've done. So when I walk into the workspace, I know exactly what's going on, because it's the latest thing here, the latest painting I photographed, archived, my notebooks, my everything. So I call it a 3D database. I track the deltas, you know, the changes, the indicators of change in the surface of the workspace, a 3D surface. I talked about database cinema, the unordered list. It's Lev Manovich wrote about the database cinema, like an example, I think it's in 1927, was Ziga Vertov's A Man with a Movie Camera, which is just like sequences of different, you know, like train wheels and like people working in a factory, and like it's like a database, right? So I think that we talk about the storytelling animal or whatever. I think we're in the age of more of the database model, and even like a technological vision, or even also artistic visions of more of a tabular, like going back to the tables, you know, of ancient times. So I talked about the non-linearity too of my practice, the cognitive topography. I talked about state-dependent retrieval and or memory and learning, and context-dependent memory and learning, whatever. So context-dependent is like I was saying in my workspace. When I sit here, I have access in my body, in my mind, of all the different things, the learnings and the concepts, whatever, the knowledge. And the state dependent is more like my physical state, like, so you can access certain things. You can actually do this purposefully, you know, like yeah. So you can have better action. I call it semantic anchoring in context too. I talked about different algorithms and stuff, like where I shuffle the folders and the papers and the folders and the Refcards. I talked about high velocity flow. I gave a warning about casually experimenting with these things, because it could be decompensating or disorganizing, although I maybe didn't put it that way. Yeah, I talked about my 15 years of Fellowcross. Yeah, so different things. Try to keep this brief. So on the 14th of May, I created a video called Sanctity in the Workspace. I talked about the lab structure, how I from field data to spatial sanctuary. This field data is when I'm in the field, I collect data, I take notes, I make urban sketches, I take photographs, I record videos, audio, different things. That's like my pipeline, you know, the inputs. I talk about the sanctity of the workspace as a sort of mandate. These are just the words I'm putting, expressing it this way. I didn't express it necessarily this way in the videos, because it's based on summaries of my transcripts. I talked about systemic collapse, the accounting error, how, like, you know, when you build a cathedral, the master builder has, like, we'll say, like his tools, and he measures things like very precisely, and a small accounting error, I call it, like in his calculations, could cause a whole structure to tumble down. People could be hurt or die. So you have the threat of catastrophic failure from just a small accounting error. And like I also mentioned, like if someone, I think I mentioned this, if someone goes into your workshop and they move like something off the surface, like I said, the surface changes, you might notice or not notice, but if you say you don't notice, you keep on going, you don't correct the error, we'll say, it could lead also to catastrophic failure. We talked about interference theory, about like avarice of the eyes or greed in the eyes, where you can see someone like when they walk into your workspace, they see something and like maybe it's uncanny and like that you can see their reaction, or like but sometimes it's like this sort of avarice, like where they see something valuable and they're almost greedy. They want to consume it, you know. And like it's tough when you have stuff like on an easel and someone walks in and it interferes with your work, you know. So interference theory also goes further, like which I maybe didn't mention, but it's like it seems when you're creating value like that in your studio, and you have an influence, like a synchronization function or signal that you send out into the environment outside your studio, and you can create value in the neighborhood, you know. So I think you're creating value out of nothing, out of paper scraps and canvas and cardboard or whatever, and paints. And it's like an alchemical process without having the religious or spiritual overtones. It's kind of secular, you know. So I talked about idolatry, iconoclasm, psychic theft, you know, the root of iconoclasm, physical violations too. When someone breaks into your studio because they see the value you're creating, they think it's magical or whatever, so they want to stop you, you know. Talked about redefining noise. It's always about the rehabilitation of the concept of noise as not as an undesirable, unwanted signal, but as an almost elegant aspect of all things in the universe. There's always noise, you know. So, yeah. That's about it for that. Whoops. Then on May 17th, I created another video called A Day in the Life of the Art Operation. I talked about the switchboard method, the rhythm in the workspace, what I call decisionless task switching in the switchboard method. It's decisionless because I just take whatever project's most near at hand, you know, like physically or mentally, cognitively, like the projects, whatever pops up, like the project, so I don't have to really decide what to work on. I work for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes longer, then I switch, right? So it's task switching. And like the whole thing is that, like in interruption science, they talk about like the cost, you know, of switching all the time. Sometimes instead, I think you can take up to 23 minutes to get back to the flow. Like takes a while, you know. But me, the way that it's seamlessly, I switch from task to task, and like I said, the way it's distributed, like tasks, like it's non-linear, you know, task assignment algorithm, whatever. And yeah, so I talked about rhythm, also the origins of the studio, the Historiotheque, and the living, working conundrum, where I live in my workspace, so my workspace is like my life space, so that's not ideal, but I can't really avoid it right now. Talked about the resynchronization signal, like low frequency oscillators, like how like entrainment and like synchronization can happen. Where I do like my morning constitutionals, and I go outside and make my field recordings of atmospheric tone, and I publish them online. Sometimes not right away, but like you get throughout the day, at some point I'll publish them on YouTube, and like you can get the sound of the tone outside the studio, and it's important because it can be reused in my practice. You know, I use the sound design and stuff, electronic music. And also it gives the tempo, you know, like what kind of day is it going to be, like you can hear the whole atmosphere, you know. I talked about like digital exhaustion, modern arrhythmia, where I think there's a kind of like, you know, like phenomenological and like psycho-spiritual like arrhythmia, not just of the heart, but like people are exhausted, you know. Yeah, so I talked about how like my work, atmospheric tone recordings and everything can be like, have like a downshift mechanism where people like will downshift, like will be stressed and exhausted, but the stress can be downshifted. Yeah, so my work's designed to help the frantic high frequency nervous systems of the public downshift from 100 hertz of the internet back to 10 hertz of calm contemplative life. I talked about my acoustic sensitivity, my $1 million ears, how I hear everything, my morning constitutional. I talked about the serious immobilities, which was one of Eric Satie's instructions for his work, vexation, which is like you repeat like the same pattern there for like, I don't know if it's like 142 times or whatever. And define the anti-signal, clock time and deep time, historical rhythms of time, the Carolingian shift in polyphony, the birth of polyphony, the Carolingian Renaissance of the 8th and 9th century, but the mechanization or standardization of clock time, the birth of linear time. So I talked about my Symphony of the Old Village, Season of the Heart, report, post-mortem and pre-mortem analyses, the research I was doing at the time, and yeah, pre-mortem like logging everything like that. I just want to say, like lately I've been going through the archives, like I said, and I'm trying to document and keep an event log of like all the events, like a painting and timestamp everything, and try to use like modern like archival like practices, like also like I'm creating like a bit extended like bibliography of all the sources that I'll put online, easily accessible, so people can see what my sources are for all of this, because I didn't really invent anything. On the 2nd of June I created a video called The Archives Land Part 2, Introduction to the Workspace. How I want to have a transparent methodology, how the interdisciplinary practice, the laboratory and everything is set up. It's an art studio, sound design lab, and research lab. How I don't want to be have things all pre-packaged, like when I communicate online, I don't really know when I sit down to record a video or to write a text what it's going to be beforehand, so it's not pre-packaged, it's like improvised, but like there's structure, you know, there's a discipline to it, methodology. Talks about day-tight containers, like the mental health, like to have day-tight like boundaries between the beginning of your day and the work day and the end of the work day, so you don't spend all night like, until 6 o'clock in the morning working on something. Sometimes it can happen, but if you're really inspired, but a lot of the time you're not dependent on inspiration, you're dependent on the discipline and the methodologies to have like a streamlined, like a fluid, like efficient practice, but you have to keep it within the day, like it's important. So, because the risk is like that you'll start writing on the walls or painting on the walls, and I've actually done that. Like you step out of the studio and you're still in that studio workshop, like mindset in the workspace, and it's important. There's risks to that. So it talks about non-linear methods, the Refcards, cultural software, which the Historiotheque, my studio, and research labs. I call it the Historiotheque. It's a form of cultural software. Refcards as modular thought. They're like physical modular units of knowledge, tangible, manually sorted, shuffled, and arranged into shifting constellations of ideas. Like the Refcard system really is the foundation of everything I do, the logging, documenting, and archiving, the operations in the cultural software. I got back into the Delta-Workspace Theory, how it's a dynamic system, anti-fragile. I gave them the modulation formula, which is A prime equals modulation of A, you know. So the direct modulation M of the underlying field or concept A, so it becomes A prime. So I deploy this to map art modulations of the noise field. I talked about historiophanies and historiopathies. Historiophanies are like historical manifestations or revelations. Historiopathies are historical pathologies. I do a lot of historical research, mostly in the philosophy of history. What else? The historiosphere is the sphere of the earth, and history happening all at once on the sphere. Yeah, the concrete workspace. The Sublime Warehouse is just something that came out of my novel, the Archives Project, and that the overarching project that had the same name, the Archives Project. How the historiosphere is a massive, multidimensional global data warehouse where history happens simultaneously across an open-ended hyper-relational sphere. I went pretty quickly over this. I got the morning constitutionals I want to get to. Enter the Workstream version 1.0.0 was the 9th of June 2026, another video. Talks about mostly my sound design practice, my acoustic ecology, my finely tuned ears, the absolute audio sphere, the sort of like a town record of the old village that I'm recording of the audio. Talked about turbulence, you know, how meditation like leads to like being sort of like more hypersensitive to sound, and I realized it's like what do they call it, like low latent inhibition, where like I have no real latent inhibition, where your brain like cancels like all the extraneous like unnecessary sensory perception, and me like I process like the whole field, like it's kind of like a fatal flaw in my brain then. I talked about the etymology of the Historiotheque, which means witness box. That's how I interpret it. So my art operation is an automated art ops in a box. It's an art operation. That's another theory that I have of art ops in the box, like kind of like a mobile recording studio. I talk about field art, which is what I do, the archive, internal arts, you know, like the internal arts is like a physical practice, like kind of like a yoga, but I do what I call nada yoga, which is hearing the unstruck sound. And because I hear music with normally on the inside of my inner ear, like I hear music, it's like it's coming from the inside of my soul or whatever. And so it takes a lot of discipline to when you have spontaneously occurring like music inwardly. It takes a lot of discipline because you're managing like the inward space and the outward environment, and you hear the sound that goes directly through your ear holes. Like, anyways, I talked about the work stream, which is not a concept I invented, but I reconceptualized it. The world stream too. The interfacing of different work streams. I'll get into that another time. Software upgrades of my official releases, which I did in May, my last of the Historiotheque as cultural software. I do my annual official declaration of production year, and now I'm at year 28, 29. I made schemas of like my ALX, I call it the system, like my rigorous comprehensive design workflow management methodology. Talks about signal synchrony, continuous review, redundancy, the additive superposition of signal synchrony, like anyways, setting the tempo like I said earlier, systemic redundancy as a feature, how I'm like a kind of aesthetic customs officer, customs inspection of the self, internal art renewal. That's that. June 19th was day-to-day operations at the end of spring. You know, the archive operations, the retrospective, that's when I started making retrospective systems, algorithms, sound design, the novel as a system, the one-dimensional bottleneck of words, where it's like a dimensionality reduction when you write the experience like 3D, 4D, maybe even higher dimensional, and like especially like conceptually in your mind, and with all the projects and concepts, like it's project based, but like the bottlenecks when you write it down, it goes at the speed of your pencil, you know, like so it reduces the dimensionality. Like when I talk about the podcast circuit, like people talking and like each taking turns, it's a very low dimensionality, and like I don't think it does justice to the experience of modernity the way that we experience it now. And I think it's very high dimensional and fast, the velocity is high, and I think we need more of a database like type model. I talked about algorithmogenesis, it's a new novel that I'm working on, the Chronotopian. I maybe didn't mention that there, but I invent algorithms as I go along. They're physical or manual procedures that in my art practice, like in painting, sound design. The mixing board metaphor. Yeah, I did talk about the Chronotopian. Atmospheric tone recordings, the Awakened Ears project, an educational project I have. Workspace manifolds, abstract cartography. That's what happens in the geology of the workspace with the stacks, the workspace surface, you know. So Archivilus is a character in my new novel that Archivilus, his name is, it's a personification of the archive. So I won't get into the morning constitutionals, but do that later. But the last one we have is the 15th of June, 2026, was the video called the Anatomy of an Aesthetic Problem, the General Theory of the Art Operation. I'll probably get into this later. Like it's been long enough now. Like I talk about the the problem space and the operational methodology and the solution space. The function is like function of problem equals solution. Like I drew out like, I'll just say real quick, like the engine of narrative. Like Cervantes is a case study, because the art operation is about like finding elegant solutions to aesthetic problems. So the aesthetic problem space of Cervantes is basically, how do you transpose a medieval knight-errant archetype into a contemporary, gritty, early modern Spanish setting without destroying the romantic weight of the myth? So you have friction. You have the chronological fiction. The problem space was bound by a stark contradiction. The 12th century chivalric fantasy code clashing directly with the harsh economic realism of 16th century Spain. Talks about inventing the modern novel, as that's his elegant solution to the problem. And even the character is always created in the abstract character orology, I call it. Each character, like, there's a problem basically that's represented by that character, and you find elegant solutions. I started like a repository on GitHub of like design concepts for my novels, when I call my novelistic phenomenologies, and I'm just going over the whole process. I talked about another equation, the universal calculus of time, basically how A equals R of T. R equals what is relevant for all times, because even centuries across centuries, like a Rembrandt or whatever, is always universally like relevant. The temporal relevance function, and I talked about currency, or currentness, whatever, of the art. And how basically I'll end on this is a civilizational crisis of taste. I think that basically it's a modern emergency, that we've lost like our ability to make judgments of taste, whether it's good or bad culturally, And so it's here that I talked about the aesthetic customs officer, my prolific output. And that's it. Maybe just quickly, like the morning constitutional, they talk mostly about the workspace, my concept of historiophany, the sacred journey at the Historiotheque. Went over some old projects. I did an evening constitutional. I talked about my daily workflow, some key reflections. Morning constitutional, another one. My ongoing projects, the series of paintings and drawings that I've made. My sound design concepts, and reflections on discovery, because in this whole archival process I make spontaneous discoveries, and it always happens like in a serendipitous manner, and whatever I'm like thinking of, I find like things that pop out of the archives. I take them out, I reshuffle the folders, I throw out a lot of stuff that's no longer necessary, old things that I printed out. That's it. I wanted to make a video of the archive, documenting the process, going over the videos. So this will stand like as part of the Refcards system, a database, where it's kind of like there's a list, of the events, the video-wise, and the transcripts and the summaries. Thanks for watching.